In the Bible, covenant is general, but it's also very special. God's promises have to do not only with the great world around us, but also with a very unique relationship God has with a special people. We're talking now about 2/3 of the Bible, the covenant with Israel, found in the Hebrew Scriptures that Christians call the Old Testament.
Since there already is the covenant with Noah, why is this covenant with Israel necessary?
Why is this so special? Well, some people think the story does end with what we've been calling the universal covenant with Noah, that all we need is our conscience and our sense of general rules of the game, the things that are given in our universal human experience. But the facts of life are that while these universal graces do restrain our rebellion, they do make our life livable, they don't really redeem it. They don't glorify it. They don't make it the way God originally intended the world to be. That's why we have a story that keeps going. The other part of the chapter on covenant, therefore, is the chapter which connects at one place, one time, with a special people, the covenant people of God called Israel. To really turn the world around to the vision of God, to the purpose and plan and the dream of God, a divine hand has to reach in and somehow turn it around. It's good to have that universal glimpse of the purposes of God, that divine spark in us that gives us a sense of where we should be going. But sparks won't do it. We suffocate the flame and we go our own way. We need more than a spark. We need, in the biblical language, a pillar of fire. That's the way the Old Testament describes the special bonding with Israel, leading it out of captivity into the land of promise. Hence, the covenant with Israel.
What was so special about this relationship with Israel?
As part of the 3rd chapter of the story, the covenant, God calls chosen people. God elects Israel. God enters into a special relationship with Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Jacob. Why? Again, mystery surrounds us. The mystery of God's election. We're not told why a small tribe at the end of the Mediterranean Ocean, right there at the Fertile Crescent, where marching armies pass south and go north, still to this day, place of tribulation, of wars, rumors of wars. Is this a laboratory for helping us to understand the purposes of God? We don't know. The calling, the election of Israel is part of the mystery of God's providence. The story continues, speaks about the beginning of this covenant as a connection with Abraham and Sarah, indeed a bonding that is responded to in faith. The Scripture tells us in both the Old and New Testaments of the trust Abraham put in God. And faith was reckoned to Abraham as righteousness, as Paul says in Romans 4:9. He and Sarah had faith that even in their old age, they might have an heir to carry forward the line, as unthinkable and even laughable as that was. By faith, Abraham set out not knowing where he was going, as it says in Scripture. So at the very beginning of Israel's covenant, God evokes the response of faith. Grace received in faith. This was a breakthrough because of its specificity, because of its response.
Where then does the covenant with Moses fit in? How did the covenant with Moses increase our understanding of God as liberator? And how did it increase our understanding of God's expectation of God's people?
God's special history with Israel continued through many, many ups and downs, described in the Hebrew Scriptures. Then something very special happened, around which even to this day Judaism gathers to celebrate its covenant. Exodus 22 says it, "I am the Lord your God, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery." One more facet of this gem, this covenant with the chosen people. This time it's a covenant with Moses, the continuation of the initial covenant with Abraham and Sarah, the promise to watch over Israel. Now it takes the form of a release of this particular people from Egyptian captivity. Again, grace is at work, also giving us a sign of the fruits of this special grace: liberation from bondage, from injustice, from oppression. Today, the theme of liberation is very much with us and is often traced back to this moment of deliverance, showing us one aspect of God's purpose for liberating those who are oppressed, marginalized, rejected, underscoring the great teaching of the New Testament that God brings the mighty from their seats and exalts those of low estate, as it says in Mary's song in the Luke's Gospel. The gift has its underside, its expectation. Here again we find the indicative, God does this, and the imperative, therefore, you do this, as a response to the grace of God. Because on the heels of the exodus from slavery comes the expectation, the giving of 10 commandments. The covenant God is a therefore God. Here is the release I'm giving you, and here's what I expect you to do. The Decalogue, as it's called, the 10 Commandments, are the underside of God's gift, a universal claim on all human beings as well as on the people chosen by God to be released from slavery. There are 2 parts to the 10 Commandments. First table, as it's called, has to do with a call for us to love God with all our heart, with all our mind, with all our soul. And the second table of the 10 Commandments boils down to different ways to love our neighbor. The love of God and the love of neighbor. These commandments are a clarification of the more dimly perceived general revelation of what's wrong and what's right given to all human beings. One might say that here the pillar of fire, which went before Israel as they made their way out of captivity, illumined for the eyes of this beleaguered community the purposes of God. They could see more clearly the love of God and the love of neighbor that all human beings were called to live out. The 10 Commandments now are passed on to the rest of us, including those of us in the Christian tradition.